Have you ever felt that little bit of unease, that anxiety when someone comes to you in the booth and they are distraught or they have a biblical question and your immediate thought is, wait, I'm just the production guy. I'm a technician, not a pastor. If you've ever felt that, you're not alone. I felt that myself, and I know tons of other people that are in similar roles that have felt the same way. We think that we are just kind of the nerds, the tech guy, the problem solver and the producer, but when it comes to people, maybe we feel less equipped. We feel like we're technicians, not pastors, and we can just pass that off to somebody else, that we should find somebody else a pastor. But here's the reality. If you're leading people in the church, you're a pastor. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the House Lights podcast. My name is Gabe, and I'm so happy you're joining us today. Here on the podcast, we explore the intersection of technical excellence and pastoral care, because to lead well behind the scenes, we have to have both. Today, we're leading into the pastoral care side, and I know this can be just such an uncomfortable thing for so many of us. I felt it myself. I know people that have felt this way as they have gone on their personal journey with pastoral care and how to lead well. So I want to take a look at scripture and some images in scripture, and I hope that it provides some encouragement and some inspiration for you as you lead people as a pastor. Let's go back to the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, God brought the people of Israel out of Egypt. They were slaves there for like 400 years. And then God, through his mighty acts, through the plagues, and with the strength of his hand, he brought them out of Egypt and delivered them from that oppression, from slavery. They were headed to the promised land, but they weren't there right away. After they crossed through the Red Sea, they were in the wilderness. The wilderness is a place of growth, a place of testing. This is where God takes his people to grow them, to help to work some of the Egypt out of Israel before he lands them in the promised land to complete his purposes. In the Jewish mind, this image runs deep. They talk about this a lot. Within this idea of desert as a testing place, a place of growth, place of testing, within this image of desert, there's lots of other images that you find physically in the desert that have very deep meanings behind them, but that maybe we or I speak for myself, that maybe I, as a Western American reader of the Bible, I miss sometimes. And I thankfully have come across some teachers in Bible college, and also some other resources in my adult life where I've been able to get a different perspective, even a bit more of a Jewish perspective on the text of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, for understanding some of these images. And it has just brought such depth and understanding and appreciation for the text. And some of these images just have spoken to me in such a deep way that it's changed the way that I operate. It's changed the way that I live. And so I want to share one of those images with you today. Actually, I think we'll be talking about two. We're not going to count the desert as an image. Desert is like this big concept, this wilderness, this testing place, you've felt it, right? You've felt the desert. You've felt the wilderness. You've been in those times in life where something's just not right. You were trying to follow God, or maybe you're not, and nothing's going right. There is trials, there's diagnoses, there's issues, there's layoffs, there's abuse, there's terrible addictions and sin in your life. Maybe it's yours, maybe it's somebody else's, maybe it's a loved one, and you felt those desert times, those dry times. I happen to live in Arizona, so I have an appreciation for the image of the desert, because I've walked in the desert here, and sometimes have walked or biked too far into the desert here, and it gets hot and it gets hard, and it just is a place where things feel a little bit hopeless and bleak when the sun is beating down on you and you've run out of water, and it just feels a bit miserable. You felt that in your life too. And I'm sure that you've even come across people in your church that have felt that. There are people in your church right now and in your life right now that are feeling that. And they may come to you when they feel that. Which brings us to the image that I want to talk about today. One side note, this is not all research I've done myself. I'm standing on the shoulders of others that have gone before me, so I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm pulling a lot of this from a teaching I heard from Marty Solomon on the Bema Discipleship podcast, and I would highly recommend you go listen to all of that podcast, all of it. The Bema Discipleship Podcast. Bema is Bema. The Bema Discipleship Podcast with Marty Solomon. This is a lesson that he gives in one of the episodes where he's talking about images of the desert. He's talking about trees. And weird thing, I really, really like trees. Trees are fascinating. And there's kind of 4 dominant trees in the desert in Israel. Biblical botany is super fascinating. I'm sure you didn't come here today expecting to hear about biblical botany, but here we are. 4 regular trees that you would have found in the desert in Israel, and in that area of the Middle East, especially in ancient times, and they all have significant cultural meanings behind them and images that they would bring to mind for the Jewish reader. Of the 4, we are going to talk about one today, the Rotem, or the broom tree. Now, the Rotem is not what you would traditionally think of as a tree. It's kind of a bush, sometimes referred to as the Rotem Bush or the broom tree. Kind of looks like a sagebrush. Not very tall, maybe just a couple feet high, and 3 maybe 4 feet high, and just a little bit wider than it is tall. And it grows in the desert all over the place. They're a very, very common sight in the desert over there in the Middle East. And when you hear Rotem in the Bible or in Jewish literature, it is synonymous with shade. Now, shade is also this big idea in the Bible. We look through scripture, and we actually, when you're looking for it, you'll find lots of references to shade that I personally have read over my whole life. Like I said, living in the desert in Arizona, I actually have a much larger appreciation for shade than I used to. There's been times where I've been out in the desert. I remember one specifically where I was mountain biking, and I was on my way back to my car, but I'd run out of water, and it was gotten way too hot. It was like right when it started to get hot in the summer, and I totally didn't think about how far I was going, how much water I should bring, and it was getting hot. I started too late in the morning, and I was so hot, probably a bit dehydrated, was out of water, and I was almost back to my car, and I just needed a break. So I found a tree, and I laid my bike down, and I laid down in the shade, and I just waited. I waited and rested in the shade for a while. And after a few minutes, I felt better and was able to go back to my car. But since that day, I've started to better understand this image and this concept of shade, in a deeper way, right? I'm going to read some scripture where we see shade reference. Listen to these references of shade, and we're going to talk about what they're representing in a few minutes. All right, Judges 9:15. The thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. We see an image of refuge or relief. Psalm chapter 80, verses 8 through 11. You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. Its branches reached as far as the sea, its shoots as far as the river. Psalm 121:5. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. Isaiah 4:6. It will be a shelter and a shade from the heat of the day and a refuge and hiding place from the storm and rain. Isaiah 25. You, God, have been a refuge for the poor, a refuge for the needy in their distress, a shelter from the storm and a shade from the heat. Isaiah 32:3. Woe to obstinate children who go down to Egypt without consulting me, who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. But Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. Isaiah 32. I see a king will reign in righteousness, and rulers will rule with justice. Each one will be like a shelter from the wind and a refuge from the storm, like streams of water in the desert and the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. So what do we see here? I think that predominantly we see this idea of shade as refuge and relief. And more often than not, we see that in reference to God. God is our shade. And that's contrasted with the shade of Egypt, the shade of Pharaoh, which we find distress and destruction in. And so we see this constant encouragement to find our refuge, find our relief in God, right? And that's the image that we see, is that God is our shade in this desert. He's our relief from the heat, from the sun, and our protection and deliverance. So that's what we see here. The Rotem Bush is associated with shade, with deliverance, with refuge. Think about it. In biblical times, there were no cars. You're not out in a 4x4, even like a side by side ripping through the desert. You're walking predominantly. You might be riding a horse or a donkey or a camel, something like that, some sort of animal. But they get hot too. So as you're walking, you are going to get hot, especially in the heat of the day. And you may need to rest. And so these Rotem bushes are the predominant source of shade in the desert. They are synonymous with shade, with relief, with refuge. But we talked about this earlier. These are not huge shade trees, right? They are 3 feet high, maybe a little bit wider than they are tall. And so you can imagine that doesn't cast a huge shadow. You kind of have to sit, and maybe your whole body doesn't even get into the shadow of it. But that's the relief. That's just enough. It's enough relief to get to the next Rotem bush. It might not get you all the way to Jerusalem. It might not get you all the way to Jericho, but it's going to get you to the next bush, to the next bit of shade. We see this in the Bible. It's associated with people that are using it as a refuge. Even if they're about to die, ready to give up and die. So Elijah, after his showdown at Mount Carmel, when he's being hunted, he sits under a Rotem bush and is ready to give up and die. This is in the Midrash, not actually in the Hebrew of the Old Testament, but in the Midrash, which is taught in Jewish tradition. Hagar puts Ishmael, Abraham's son, under a Rotem when she thought he was going to die, when she was giving up and she said, I can't bear to watch the boy die. She lays him under a rotem bush and then walks away. It's not actually in the Hebrew text that it was a rotem, but it would make sense. People come across this rotem, and it's the relief in this dry and arid desert. We read over that in the Bible so often, but it's such a cool image when we stop to think about it. So we see God as our refuge and our shade, as our relief in our deserts. But that's not all we see in these scriptures. In the Psalm 80 scripture, let me read that again. You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. Its branches reached as far as the sea, its shoots as far as the river. The psalmist is talking about God bringing Israel out of Egypt to be shade for the world. That was Israel's calling. God pulled them out of Egypt, not just to deliver them, which he did because he loved them, but he planted them to be a shade, to be a refuge and a relief and a deliverance for a dry and arid world. And then in Isaiah 32, I'll read it again. See, a king will reign in righteousness and rulers will rule with justice. One king, many rulers. King, Jesus. Rulers, that's us, God's chosen, called people that are his children. Each one will be like a shelter from the wind and a refuge from the storm, like streams of water in the desert and the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. So on one hand, God is our shade. He's our refuge and relief. But in other places, we are the shade. We are the refuge, the relief. Israel was moved out of Egypt to be shade for the world. And part of what the desert teaches us is how to be that shade for someone else. One of the lessons that Israel learned in the desert was kind of this lesson of just enough. God always gave them enough, but it wasn't necessarily the opulence or the security of Egypt. God was teaching them dependence on him. So when they gathered manna, they were able to gather enough for the day. But if they tried to gather more than what they needed for the day, it would spoil. And this is an ongoing lesson. And I think the Rotem really embodies this lesson of just enough. It gives you enough shade, enough relief to make it to the next shade, to make it to the next Rotem bush. It's not an oak tree, right? When I grew up on the East Coast, and we have these big shade trees. They cover a whole yard, and it's just like luxurious, right? And this awesome shade. But that's not what the Rotem provides. That's not the shade that you would find out in the desert. But the shade that you do find there is enough. And that's one of the things that God's been teaching me, is that he always provides enough for me. And not only that, part of what the desert teaches us is that it's not just enough for ourselves, but just enough for others. I get it. Pastoral care is hard, intimidating. I love to have answers for everybody. And suffering is just uncomfortable to encounter, especially in somebody else. I don't have answers for suffering. What I want to give people is I want to be this oak tree of shade and just covering everybody, be able to relieve their suffering and solve their problems. That's how I'm wired. I want to be able to do that for people. But I know that I can't. When someone comes to me and their partner just got a cancer diagnosis, their child got a cancer diagnosis, when there was a tragic death or a betrayal or abuse or addiction or any of these other terrible things that people walk through in their wilderness, in their deserts. I want to give them the shade of the oak tree. But the image that we see in Scripture is not the shade of an oak tree from us. Not always. It's the shade of a Rotem bush. It's the shade to give people just enough relief and support and refuge. They make it to the next step in their journey. I get it. It's hard. It's uncomfortable, and I'm insecure about it too. And we want to fix problems, but sometimes we can't. More often than not, I can't. I can't fix it, but I can be there. I can show up. I can lean in. And also, we're not meant to be a counselor, right? We can refer people to professionals to get a lot of that more professional help. And I really, really encourage you to find someone in your area that you can refer people to that's going to help them work through any of those mental health or even just processing through whatever they're walking through. Because that's not our role as pastors. Our role is to introduce them to Jesus and make sure that they feel the love and support and guidance from Scripture during whatever walk they're going through. So here's some practical takeaways. When someone's hurting, pray with them, sit with them, and follow up. Just be present. Just be there. Because the most commonly searched thing on ChatGPT right now is how to deal with loneliness. And that's heartbreaking. And we can stand in that gap for people. We can be there when our volunteers need us, when people in our congregation need us, when other people on our team need us. We can be there. We can provide shade. Sometimes silence is enough. There's a ancient practice in the Jewish culture called sitting Shiva. And I don't fully understand it, but you just sit with someone in their mourning, silent. You don't comfort. You don't say all the platitudes that come to mind. You just sit and you are present, and your presence is comfort. Your presence is support. God's put you there for a reason. Maybe it's to sit silently. And remember, you're not solving their desert. That's between them and God. God is the ultimate deliverer. We're just called to be shade. So next time you feel inadequate, remember the tiny, the meek, the modest Rotem. Be just enough. I know you can do it. It's hard. But that's what we're called to be, right? Pastors. Shade. Thanks for hanging out today. I hope that this was encouragement to you, and I hope to see you back next time. Thanks so much.